Hey guys, this is Jonathan, and I'm back with another game from Zurich 1953. Today we're going to look at a game between Geller and Euwe. It's a fantastic game. It won a Brilliancy Prize. It features a really straightforward and very promising looking attack from Geller after pawn sacrifice. But in return, we get some really phenomenal counterattack from Max Euwe. Just some brilliant play here. So let's just jump into the game, okay? So d4, f6, c4, e6, c3, and we're going to have a Nimzo today. We get c5, and then a3 from from Geller, which is far from the most common move here, but it really clarifies the structure early on. And we get this typical Nimzo-Indian structure. So b6 and bishop d3, which Bronstein suggests that this is already a mistake, and that really knight e2 was required here in order to not lose a tempo later. It's really not that clear, but it's really not immediately clear why that saves a tempo, because it appears that after knight e2, bishop b7, knight g3, and castles, since black has delayed this bishop c6, that he's going to force white to play f3 anyway. But after bishop d3 in this line, just sacking the pawn should be really dangerous, and must be why Bronstein suggests that this is okay for white. Instead, what happened in the game, going backwards, he played bishop d3 first, and here, after bishop b7, he has to play f3 now, which he doesn't really want to play. If he instead plays knight e2, intending to go into the same line that we just showed, black has some extra options after bishop xd2 or g2. For one, it's not so dangerous because he hasn't castled into this open g file. After rook g1, he has an e4 square, which he wouldn't have when the knight was posted on g3. And after rook takes g7, he's got bishop g6. And the rook on g7 is going to have some trouble getting out of there. So I think that that may be the difference for why f3 is required here, but not after the knight e2 line. So instead, we get f3 to prevent that. We get knight c6, e2, just standard development, castles, castles, and he's going after the c5 pawn, or c4 pawn immediately. So e4, and knight e8, which is an interesting defensive move. He has a couple ideas here. One, he'd like to meet f4 with f5, which is going to slow down the advancement and begin to break up the central pawns. And also, he wants to avoid this pin on the knight. So that's the idea there. So we get knight g3, which is just adding an extra attacker to f5 before he plays f4. And this way he prevents the f5 defense. Euwe just continues his attack on c4. This is, I think, and not a move that's immediately obvious to make, because it seems like that I'm undoubling the white pawns. But in reality, black is just opening up the c file to add an attacker. Like this, the only attackers that he can really add to the pawn are this knight and then the bishop coming to a6. I suppose the knight could also come to e6, but in this way he can add a rook to it and possibly a queen if he needs to. So of course white takes back, and we bring the rook in, and f4, just continuing the attack, and just it's sacrificing the pawn here on c4 without really any attempt to defend it. If something like queen, if he goes back and plays like queen e2 instead, we get just bishop a6, and the pawn's going to fall anyway. He sort of doomed that pawn long ago. So instead, he just trades this pawn for a really promising attack on the king side. So of course, we take the pawn, and then f5, just chugging along here. He intends to play f6, which would be another pawn sacrifice, but of course, black would take with the knight. So if we just get f6, knight takes, and then he's going to get the pin anyway that black was trying to avoid a few moves earlier. So in order to prevent that, Euwe plays f6 here, which is I think again would be a difficult move to make, but really does put to slow down what he's wanting to do here and sets him up for this queenside counterattack. So we get rook f4, which the attack really does look very threatening at this point. He's got the two bishops are going to come in. He can play rook h4 and then queen h5, and he'll be attacking with almost his entire army. But the posure that Euwe shows here is really phenomenal. But honestly, shouldn't be that surprising. Max Euwe did, after all, he played 70 games with Alatine, so it shouldn't be that surprising that he can handle himself under an attack. And his pieces are really pretty well placed. This bishop on b7, the knight on c4, and the rook on c8 are all nicely positioned to begin his own attack. But he really kicks off an excellent move here. He plays b5, which is going to allow a square for the queen to come in. And notice it's going to jump to this diagonal that the king is on and put somewhat exposed because of this f4, f5 push. Really, really phenomenal play here. So rook h4, just carrying on. And if he had tried to, excuse me, if Geller had tried a different move order, he's going to have the same sort of problems. So if queen h5, then queen b6. If he plays knight e2, trying to hang on to the pawn, just knight e5, and he's never quite going to get his pawn, his duo over on the king side the way he wants after this queen b6 move. So we get rook h4, queen b6, and then e5, which is just opening the lines for the bishop. It also lets the rook defend the d4, but this is a pawn sacrifice because it's the pawn is pinned, so it's not really defending there. So black takes this opportunity, peels off another pawn, and we get quite forcing play here for the next few moves. So pawn takes f6, opening up that bishop down on h7. Knight takes d3, and then white is forced to take back on d3. It seems like that he might be able to play this in-between move of taking on e7. Whenever I was reviewing this game on my own, I thought that this move was impossible just because of rook takes c1, rook takes, and then knight takes, oops, and then you're going to take here and promote to a queen. But after rook takes and then queen takes, black stands much better. He's got an extra pawn and a better pawn structure and a better minor piece as well. But Bronstein found an even easier refutation to this. He just is going to play queen c6, which is going to threaten mate here, and then he's going to pick up the pawn. So I think that even more clear. So that's why we got queen takes here. And then I think that the next move, again, it's a little bit scary to leave this pawn on h7 hanging, but that's exactly what black does. He just takes off this pawn on e6, and after queen takes check and king f7, Geller brings in another piece, and this just looks terrifying. But Euwe unleashes an amazing move here. He just plays rook h8, just sacrificing a whole rook. And all he wants for this rook is to gain access to the c2 square. There's no way that white can decline this, because if he does, he's just going to lose the bishop on h6. So really, he's forced to take it, which allows rook c2. And now, all of a sudden, the black king seems more or less okay, and it's white who's really got to figure out what to do here. He does actually have a defense, which we'll look at here in a second, but from a practical point of view, it's impossible, I think, to expect someone to find the defense to this over the board. Bronstein said it took him a week of analysis before he found it. So we just get rook c1 from Euwe, and after rook g2, king f1, queen b3, uh, just threatening to come into f3, king e1, f3, and you and Geller resigned here. There's just nothing's going to happen here. He's just going to play a check on f2, and then probably a mate is going to be quickly to follow. But going back a few moves, his defense is quite surprising. He has to play d5 here instead of rook c1. And after queen b6 check, he has to play king h1 and queen f2, and then rook g1. And so then after the bishop takes, he's got to play rook e4, which is threatening mate on e8, but also is going to allow him after the bishop takes, he's going to take back with the knight, and he's somehow going to be okay after this. Black is going to have some problems after the queen moves himself here. Going back again, instead of queen b6, if he just plays queen takes d5, then rook e4 right now is gonna cause some real problems. He's again threatening the mate here, and that's just no good for him. If we go back again, play bishop d5, then rook d1 is the saving move here, which is not terribly obvious. If we get rook g2 check, king f1, after these moves, it's very dynamic, but white is going to hold. But instead, like I said, we got this rook c2 and then rook c1, and it's just over. This was a pretty fantastic game. I was really surprised because it seemed like the threats on the king side from Geller were virtually going to be unstoppable, but you really find some incredibly active, dynamic play and response. So I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I know that I really enjoyed looking at it, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.